I didn't expect dying to sound like static. Just a low, buzzing hum behind my ears, while my lungs filled with copper and the cold marble of the foyer pressed into my cheek. He didn't even look at me as I bled out. He just adjusted his cuffs. So, when I woke up gasping in my childhood bed, smelling burnt toast and cheap vanilla perfume instead of blood, I didn't cry in gratitude. I just threw up. Then, I decided my stepsister could have him. The nausea didn't pass for an hour. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, my bare feet sinking into the ugly, mustard yellow carpet that my stepmother, Diane, had bought on clearance 10 years ago. It scratched against my soles. The texture was undeniably surreal. I dug my toenails into the synthetic fibers until they ached. Alive. I was alive. My throat felt raw, not from screaming, but from the phantom sensation of a crushed windpipe. I touched my neck. The skin was smooth, unbroken. No bruises, blooming purple and black in the shape of a man's thumb. I dragged a hand down my face. My skin was damp with cold sweat, sticking to my hairline. From downstairs, a voice shrilled, "Harper, if you don't get down here and wash these dishes, I swear to God." Diane, her voice grated like a cheap saw on plywood. In my last life, that voice used to make me shrink. I used to scramble, eager to please, desperate to carve out a tiny space of safety in a house that barely tolerated me. Now, the sound just gave me a dull headache. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. The red numbers glared. 7:14 a.m., October 12th. My breath hitched. A short, ugly sound scraped out of my throat. I knew this day. I knew the exact weight of the air. The gray drizzle hitting the window pane. The faint smell of wet asphalt creeping through the poorly insulated window. It was the day the Cole family lawyer was coming to our dreary little suburb. The day they were looking for the girl who had pulled the heir, Harrison Cole, from a wrecked car 15 years ago. The girl with the silver locket. My eyes darted to the scratched wooden vanity in the corner of my room. The top drawer was slightly ajar. I stood up. My legs shook so violently, I had to grab the edge of the bed frame to keep from hitting the floor. I didn't feel like a woman reborn, with a master plan. I felt like a rat that had just barely dragged itself out of a trap, missing half a leg and bleeding. I forced myself to walk to the vanity. I pulled the drawer open. There, tucked under a pile of faded cotton socks, was a small, tarnished silver box. I opened it. The locket sat on a bed of cheap velvet. It was heavy, silver, engraved with the initials HC on the back. It still smelled faintly of river water and old metal. In my previous life, I had rushed downstairs, clutching this locket, and proudly presented myself to the lawyer. Madison, my stepsister, had stood in the corner, her face tight with a jealousy so corrosive it practically ate a hole through the linoleum floor. I had married Harrison Cole. I had thought I was walking into a fairy tale. A fairy tale. I laughed, a dry, hacking sound that hurt my chest. Harrison Cole was a monster, dressed in bespoke Italian wool. The public saw a tragic, brooding billionaire. I saw the man who systematically isolated me, broke my jaw because I spoke to a male waiter for too long, and ultimately watched me die on his imported Italian marble floor when his illegal debts caught up with him. He had used me as a human shield. Literally, the locket felt heavy in my palm. Cold. I hated it. It felt like holding a live grenade. I heard footsteps thumping up the stairs. Heavy, fast. Madison. Harper, are you deaf? She slammed my door open without knocking. I didn't turn around immediately. I focused on the smell of her. Madison always wore a perfume that smelled like artificial strawberries and sugar. It was cloying. It coated the back of my throat. Diane is losing her mind, Madison snapped, crossing her arms. She was wearing a silk robe that used to be mine, before she decided it looked better on her. Her blonde hair was in perfect, heat-styled waves. She looked expensive, even here in our rotting little house. She was always meant for nicer things. She firmly believed that. I slowly turned around, leaving the silver box open on the vanity. I let the locket dangle from my fingers for a second, catching the weak morning light before tossing it carelessly onto the wood. It landed with a dull clack. Madison's eyes immediately tracked the sound. She stopped talking. Her gaze locked onto the silver metal. I saw the exact moment the calculation began in her head. She knew what it was. I had told her the story when we were kids, back when I was stupid enough to think we could be sisters. "I'm coming," I said. My voice sounded flat, rusty. I didn't sound like myself. Or maybe I just didn't sound like the girl she was used to bullying. I walked past her, my shoulder brushing hers. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were glued to the locket. I walked down the stairs, gripping the wooden banister so tight my knuckles turned white. My heart was thumping a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. Take it, I prayed, to whatever twisted God had sent me back. Please, take it. Take the money. Take the status. Take the monster. I went into the kitchen and turned on the hot water. I plunged my hands into the soapy basin, welcoming the scalding heat. It grounded me. It proved I had nerves, that I was breathing. 10 minutes later, Madison came down. She didn't say a word. She just sat at the kitchen island, filing her nails. But her posture was rigid, electric. She had it. I didn't need to check the vanity to know the drawer was empty. I kept my head down, scrubbing a frying pan until the Teflon started to flake off. A dark, ugly knot of relief tightened in my stomach. I was condemning her to a nightmare. I knew exactly what Harrison Cole did behind closed doors. I knew about the basement. I knew about his temper. And as I stood there, listening to the rhythmic scrape of her nail file, I realized I didn't care. I didn't feel heroic. I didn't feel particularly good about myself. I just wanted to survive. The lawyer arrived at exactly 2 p.m. His name was Mr. Caldwell. I remembered him. He was a small, meticulous man with a graying mustache and a briefcase that cost more than our house. He smelled like expensive leather and peppermint. Diane had spent the last 2 hours frantic, forcing us to scrub the baseboards and hide the mail that had "Final Notice" stamped in red ink. When the doorbell rang, she smoothed her cheap polyester skirt and slapped on a smile so wide it looked painful. I stayed in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, peeling an orange. My fingers were sticky with juice. I peeled it slowly, methodically, tearing the rind into tiny, jagged pieces. I needed something to do with my hands. If I stayed still, I would start shaking again. I listened to the muffled voices from the living room. "Mr. Cole has spent a great deal of resources trying to locate the young woman who saved his life," Caldwell was saying. His tone was polite, but detached. A man used to dealing with people beneath his tax bracket. "Well, you found her," Diane gushed. I could practically hear the dollar signs ringing in her head. There was a pause. Then, Madison's voice, soft, sweet, entirely fabricated. "It was so long ago. I was just a girl. I never thought... I mean, I never did it for a reward. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. The metallic tang flooded my mouth, grounding me in the present. In the past, this was the moment I had burst into the room, defensive, yelling that it was my locket. I had looked crazy. Madison had looked like a victim. It had taken a DNA test to prove it was me. And even then, Harrison had looked at me with distaste for making a scene. This time, I took a bite of the orange. It was sour. I chewed it slowly. "Do you have the item, miss?" Caldwell asked. "Yes. I've kept it safe all these years," Madison said. I heard the faint clink of metal against wood. She was setting it on the coffee table. "Fascinating," Caldwell murmured. "This is indeed the family crest. However, Mr. Cole insists on meeting you personally to confirm he remembers certain details of that night." My stomach dropped. I stopped chewing. Certain details. Harrison didn't remember shit. He had been unconscious, bleeding from a head wound, smelling of cheap whiskey and ozone. I had dragged his heavy, limp body out of the driver's seat just before the engine block caught fire. The only detail he remembered was the locket, which I had accidentally dropped in the mud. He hadn't seen my face. It had been pitch black. But Madison didn't know that. "Of course," Madison said, not missing a beat. "I'd love to see him again. I've always wondered if he was okay." I threw the rest of the orange into the trash can. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. I had to see this. I had to see her seal her own fate. I pushed the swinging kitchen door open and walked into the living room. All three of them turned to look at me. Diane glared, a silent warning to get out. Madison stiffened, her eyes darting to my face, searching for the outrage, the betrayal. She was waiting for the fight. I just smiled, a small, polite, thoroughly defeated smile. "Sorry," I muttered, looking at the floor. "Just getting some water." I walked past them to the small, wet bar in the corner. I could feel Madison's eyes burning into my back. She was confused. She had expected a war, and I was surrendering before a shot was fired. "And this is?" Mr. Caldwell asked, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Just my stepdaughter, Harper," Diane said dismissively. "Don't mind her. She's a bit slow today. Now, about this meeting with Mr. Cole." I poured a glass of tap water. The pipes groaned. I took a sip. It tasted like chlorine. "Mr. Cole will send a car tomorrow evening," Caldwell said, standing up and snapping his briefcase shut. "He is hosting a small private dinner at his estate. He requests your presence, Miss Madison. And," Caldwell paused, looking toward me. "He mentioned that the young woman he remembers was quite timid. Perhaps bringing your family would make you feel more at ease." Madison's jaw tightened. She didn't want us there. She wanted to play the orphan, the solitary savior. But she couldn't say no to the lawyer. "We would be honored," Diane practically shouted, already mentally packing her bags. Caldwell nodded curtly. "Tomorrow at 7. Good day." When the front door clicked shut, the silence in the living room was suffocating. Madison turned to me. The sweet, demure facade cracked, revealing the ugly, jagged ambition underneath. "What are you playing at, Harper?" I took another sip of water. The glass felt cold against my palm. "I'm not playing at anything. You saw me take it." Her voice was a hiss. "You know it's yours." "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. It was a bad lie, and we both knew it. That was the point. Let her think I was a coward. Let her think I was too broken, too passive to fight back. I lost that locket years ago. Diane snorted. God, you're pathetic, Harper. Can't even keep track of a piece of junk. Good thing Madison found it. This is our ticket out of here. I looked at Madison. She was wearing my old robe, clutching the locket that was meant to be my death sentence. She looked triumphant. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of pity. It surprised me. It lasted only a second before the memory of a cracked rib suffocated it. Enjoy the dinner, Madison, I said softly. I set the glass down. It left a wet ring on the cheap veneer. I hope he's everything you dreamed of. I walked back up the stairs. I needed to pack, not for the dinner, for the day after. I had $3,000 saved up in a hollowed-out book under my mattress. In my last life, I had used it to buy a wedding dress. In this life, I was buying a bus ticket. The Cole estate was exactly as I remembered it. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress disguised as a mansion. High stone walls, wrought iron gates that hissed open like a dying breath, and a driveway so long it made you feel isolated before you even reached the front door. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of the black SUV they had sent for us. It sounded like bones breaking. I sat in the back, pressed against the window, staring at the manicured lawns rolling past in the twilight. The sky was the color of a bruised plum. Beside me, Madison was practically vibrating. She was wearing a red cocktail dress she had charged to Diane's maxed-out credit card. It was too tight, too loud. It screamed desperation. She smelled of hairspray and nervous sweat, disguised by that cloying strawberry perfume. Diane was barking orders under her breath. Sit straight. Don't slurp your soup. Laugh at his jokes, even if they aren't funny. Harper, for God's sake, keep your mouth shut and don't embarrass us. I won't, I murmured. When the car stopped, the driver opened the door. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and impending rain. I stepped out, my cheap flats hitting the cobblestones. I looked up at the looming stone facade of the house. My chest tightened. A physical pain shot through my left shoulder. Phantom pain. That was the shoulder Harrison had dislocated when I tried to leave the first time. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, breathing in the cold air, forcing the memory back into the dark corner of my mind. You aren't staying, I reminded myself. You are just here to deliver the lamb. The heavy oak doors opened before we even reached the steps. A butler, James, I remembered his name was James. He was missing half his left index finger, bowed slightly. The master is waiting in the dining room, James said, his voice flat. We followed him through the grand foyer. The marble floors gleamed. I kept my eyes fixed on the back of Madison's red dress, refusing to look at the spot near the staircase where I had died. If I looked, I knew I would scream. I could feel the coldness of that marble radiating upward through the soles of my shoes. The dining room was cavernous. A long mahogany table stretched across the center, lit by a heavy crystal chandelier. And sitting at the far end, shrouded in the dim, atmospheric lighting he always preferred, was Harrison Cole. He stood up as we entered. He was undeniably beautiful. That was the trap. Tall, with sharp, aristocratic features, dark hair swept back, and eyes so pale they looked like cracked ice. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He moved with a lazy, liquid grace that disguised how coiled and violent he was underneath. Welcome. His voice was smooth, a low baritone that vibrated in the chest. Madison gasped softly, an entirely genuine reaction. She was hooked, hook, line, and sinker. Mr. Cole, Diane simpered, shoving Madison forward. It is such an honor. This is my daughter, Madison. Harrison stepped out of the shadows. He didn't look at Diane. His pale eyes locked onto Madison. He studied her. The red dress, the heavy makeup, the silver locket resting conspicuously against her collarbone. For a second, a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Disappointment? Amusement? It was gone before I could parse it. Madison, he said, tasting the name, you look different than I imagined. I was only 15, Madison said, her voice breathy, attempting to sound coy. People change. Indeed they do, Harrison murmured. He stepped closer to her. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I instinctively took a step back, bumping into a heavy velvet curtain. Harrison's gaze snapped to me. He had barely registered. I was in the room until that moment. His pale eyes swept over me. I was wearing a drab gray sweater and a pair of black slacks that were slightly too short. I had pulled my hair back into a severe, unflattering bun. I had deliberately made myself invisible. But when his eyes met mine, the breath left my lungs. He stared at me, really stared. Not with the polite disinterest he had shown Madison, but with a sudden, intense sharpness. The hair on my arms stood up. It was the look of a predator spotting movement in the tall grass. "And who is this?" he asked, not breaking eye contact with me. "That's just my stepsister, Harper," Madison said quickly, stepping into his line of sight, desperate to reclaim his attention. She's very shy." I dropped my gaze to the floor immediately. I slouched my shoulders. I made myself small. "Look away," I begged, silently. "Look at the shiny red toy." "Harper," Harrison repeated softly. He walked around Madison. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands began to tremble. I clasped them together in front of me, digging my nails into my palms until the pain focused me. He stopped right in front of me. I could smell him. Sandalwood, expensive scotch, and underneath it all, a faint, metallic scent that always reminded me of gunpowder. "You're shaking, Harper," he observed. His voice was quiet, meant only for me. "I'm cold," I lied. My voice cracked. It wasn't an act. I was terrified. Standing this close to him, my body remembered the trauma, even if the timeline hadn't happened yet. My muscles braced for a blow. He reached out. I flinched, violently. I jerked back so hard, my shoulder hit the wall. The room went dead silent. Diane gasped in horror. Madison looked like she wanted to strangle me. Harrison froze, his hand suspended in the air. He looked at his own hand, then back at me. A deep, dangerous curiosity flared in his pale eyes. "Forgive me," he said slowly, lowering his hand. "I didn't mean to startle you." "She's a bit jumpy," Diane intervened, laughing nervously. "A bit touched in the head, if you ask me. Let's sit, shall we? The food smells wonderful." Harrison didn't move for a long second. He just watched me, dissecting my reaction. He was a man who noticed everything. He noticed that I hadn't flinched like a shy girl. I had flinched like a beaten dog. Finally, he turned away. "Yes, let's sit." Dinner was a slow, agonizing torture. I stared at my plate, pushing a piece of rare steak around with my fork. The red juice bled into the mashed potatoes. It made my stomach turn. Madison dominated the conversation, guided expertly by Harrison. He asked her questions about the night of the accident. "I just remember the smoke," Madison lied, reciting the story I had told her years ago. "And dragging you out. You were so heavy. I lost my shoe in the mud. You were very brave, Harrison said smoothly. He took a sip of his wine. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't look angry either. He looked amused, like he was playing a game. It was just instinct, Madison beamed. And you? Harrison suddenly asked, directing his attention across the table to me. I froze. Were you there that night, Harper? I kept my eyes on my plate. No, I was asleep. Pity, he mused. Madison says you're sisters, but you don't look alike. You don't act alike. We're stepsisters, Madison corrected quickly. And Harper is just... She's always been a homebody. She doesn't like excitement. Is that right? Harrison asked. I could feel his gaze on me, heavy, suffocating. You prefer a quiet life, Harper? I forced myself to look up, meeting his eyes for a fraction of a second. Yes, I just want to be left alone. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face. It didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes, Harper, the things we want are the things we are least likely to get. The threat was veiled, but my blood ran cold. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know I was the real girl from the crash. But his predatory instincts were piqued by my fear. I had given him the wrong reaction. I had made myself a puzzle. You need to leave, my inner voice screamed. Tonight, the dinner eventually ended. Madison was glowing, practically floating on air. Harrison had asked her to stay for a private tour of the gallery, while Diane and I were sent home in the SUV. As I walked out the front doors, the cool night air hit my face, and I finally took a full breath. I had survived the dinner. Madison was in the tiger's cage, locking the door behind herself. The SUV ride back was silent. Diane was asleep, snoring softly in the passenger seat. I sat in the back, staring out the window, watching the wrought iron gates of the coal estate shrink in the rearview mirror. I wasn't going back to my childhood bed. I had packed a duffel bag before we left. It was hidden in the bushes by the side of our house. When the car pulled into our driveway, I woke Diane up, told her I was going for a walk to clear my head, and grabbed the bag. I walked 3 miles to the Greyhound bus station in the pouring rain, my cheap flats soaked through. My gray sweater hung heavy and wet against my skin. I didn't care. I felt lighter than I had in 2 lifetimes. I bought a ticket to a small town in Oregon, 3 states away, a place with lots of trees and no billionaires. As I sat on the hard plastic chair in the waiting area, watching the rain lash against the grimy windows, a tiny, dark thought crept into my mind. Madison was in that house. She was wearing my locket. She was going to sleep in the bed I died in. I took a deep breath, smelling the stale coffee and floor wax of the bus terminal. It smelled like freedom. Good luck, Madison, I whispered to the empty room. You're going to need it. The bus ride took 3 days. 72 hours of sleeping with my chin tucked to my chest, breathing in the sour scent of unwashed bodies and the chemical tang of the toilet at the back of the cabin. When the pneumatic doors finally hissed open in Newport, Oregon, I stepped out into a wall of gray mist. It was a decaying little logging town that smelled heavily of salt water, wet cedar, and fish guts. I found a cramped studio apartment above a 24-hour laundromat. It cost $400 a month in cash. The floorboards were permanently damp, and the air constantly hummed with the mechanical churning of washing machines directly beneath my bed. It smelled of industrial bleach and cheap floral fabric softener. I loved it. It was the smell of anonymity. I got a job at a diner out on the highway, a rusted chrome box called the Anchor. My boss, a wide-hipped woman named Brenda, who smoked unfiltered cigarettes while flipping pancakes, didn't ask for a social security number. She just handed me a stained pink uniform and a damp rag that smelled like old grease and onions. For 6 months, I built a ghost of a life. I woke up, tied my hair into a tight, ugly knot, walked 2 miles in the relentless Pacific Northwest rain, and poured cheap coffee into heavy ceramic mugs until my wrists ached. I kept my head down. I didn't make friends. I didn't open a bank account. I hoarded my cash tips in a rusted Folgers coffee can under my sink. The physical trauma of my past life slowly began to untangle itself from my muscles. The phantom pain in my left shoulder dulled into a faint ache when it rained. I stopped waking up, gasping for air at 3 a.m., waiting for the heavy, terrifying thud of Harrison's footsteps on the stairs. I was safe. Madison had taken my place on the chopping block, and I was free to rot quietly in this damp corner of the world. Then, on a Tuesday in late March, I saw them. I was wiping down the laminate counter, scraping dried ketchup off the edge with my thumbnail, when Brenda cranked up the small, fuzzy television mounted in the corner. It was tuned to a national entertainment news channel. "Look at the rock on that one," Brenda muttered, exhaling a cloud of blue smoke. I looked up. The wet rag slipped from my fingers, hitting the linoleum floor with a wet slap. There, on the grainy screen, was Madison. She was draped in a silver silk gown, leaning into Harrison Cole's chest at some black-tie charity gala in New York. The camera zoomed in on her left hand. A diamond the size of a quail egg dragged her finger down. The banner beneath them read, "Billionaire Harrison. Cole announces engagement to childhood savior." Harrison looked directly into the flashing cameras. His face was a smooth, flawless mask of aristocratic restraint. He looked exactly the same. The sharp line of his jaw, the severe cut of his hair. But Madison looked different. She was smiling, a wide, practiced thing, but her eyes were tight. The skin around them was stretched, tense. She looked thinner. Her hand, clutching Harrison's forearm, was white-knuckled. I knew that grip. It wasn't affection. It was a desperate attempt to anchor herself in a riptide. A heavy, suffocating wave of nausea rolled over me. The smell of frying bacon suddenly turned my stomach. I gripped the edge of the counter, the cheap laminate digging into my palms. My ears started to ring, a high-pitched, metallic whine that drowned out the diner's jukebox. He hasn't killed her yet, I thought. A vicious, jagged edge of relief cutting through the nausea. She's alive. She got what she wanted. "You okay, Harper?" Brenda asked, squinting at me through the smoke. "You look like you just swallowed a ghost." I blinked, forcing my vision to clear. The television cut to a commercial for laundry detergent. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice hoarse. I bent down and picked up the dirty rag, my knees popping. "Just ate something bad." I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my thin mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the dryers downstairs. Madison had the ring. The wedding was approaching. The trap was springing shut on her. I had nothing to do with it anymore. So why did the back of my neck prickle with cold sweat? Paranoia is a physical weight. It sits at the base of your skull, pulling your posture down, making your eyes dart to the corners of rooms. It started with small things. A week after the engagement announcement, a black SUV parked across the highway from the diner. It sat there for 3 hours, its engine idling, the tinted windows impenetrable. My stomach seized into a hard knot every time I poured coffee for the window booths. I accidentally scalded my own thumb with boiling water because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When my shift ended, I slipped out the back door, walking home through the muddy alleyways instead of the main road. The SUV was gone the next day. I told myself I was losing my mind, a byproduct of trauma. Then came the customer in booth 4. He was an older man, maybe late 50s, wearing a gray raincoat that looked too expensive for the anchor. He ordered black coffee and a slice of cherry pie. He didn't touch the pie. The gelatinous red filling bled into the crust, congealing under the harsh fluorescent lights. He just sat there, reading a newspaper. But every time I turned my back to bus a table, I felt the heavy, scraping pressure of his gaze on me. I recognized the type. He moved with a quiet, observant stillness. Private security, investigator. I rushed to the back room, my chest heaving, locking myself in the tiny, foul-smelling employee bathroom. I stared at myself in the cracked mirror over the sink. My face was pale, shiny with sweat. Dark purple shadows bruised the skin under my eyes. "You are imagining things," I told my reflection, gripping the edges of the porcelain sink. "Harrison doesn't care about you. He has Madison. He has the locket." I finished my shift in a state of hypervigilance, my skin crawling with every chime of the front doorbell. By the time I walked back to my apartment, the rain was coming down in thick, freezing sheets. My boots sloshed through the puddles, soaking my socks. I trudged up the wooden stairs to my apartment, keys in hand. The hallway smelled strongly of boiled cabbage and old dust. I stopped dead at the top of the landing. There was a package sitting on my welcome mat. It was a small, plain cardboard box. No return address. Just my name, Harper, written in sharp, black ink. The air in my lungs turned to ice. I stood there for a full minute, the rain dripping from my hair down my neck. The hallway was dead silent, save for the muffled rumble of a washing machine below. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to turn around, run down the stairs, and never come back. But the morbid, paralyzing curiosity of the prey held me in place. I nudged the box with the toe of my wet boot. It was heavy. I unlocked my door with shaking hands, kicked the box inside, and locked the deadbolt behind me. I didn't turn on the lights. The only illumination came from the sickly yellow street lamp filtering through the blinds. I grabbed a steak knife from the small kitchenette block. I knelt on the damp floorboards and sliced through the clear packing tape. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. I pulled the cardboard flaps back. Inside was a layer of black tissue paper. It smelled distinctly of sandalwood and ozone, a smell I knew intimately. My breath hitched. I pushed the paper aside. Sitting at the bottom of the box was the tarnished silver box from my childhood vanity. My vision blurred. A loud, rushing sound filled my ears. I reached out, my fingers trembling so violently I could barely grasp the metal lid. I flipped it open. The locket was gone. In its place was a single, crisp, cream-colored card. High-grade cardstock. Heavy. Expensive. I picked it up. In the same sharp, black ink, a single sentence was written in a cramped, elegant script. You flinched before I even raised my hand. The card slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor. He knew. He didn't know about the rebirth. He couldn't. But Harrison Cole was a predator, and predators understand fear better than they understand anything else. He had seen the raw, domestic terror in my eyes that night at the dinner table. Madison was playing a role. I had been bleeding real fear, And a man like Harrison didn't leave anomalies uninvestigated. I scrambled backward, crab walking away from the box until my spine hit the edge of my mattress. My lungs desperately pulled for air that felt too thin. He had found me. I had 10 minutes. That was the rule I had established in my head when I first ran. If the ghost ever caught up, I had 10 minutes to disappear again. I dragged myself off the floor, my knees aching. I didn't bother packing clothes. I pulled the rusted Folgers can from under the sink, my fingernails scraping against the metal as I pried the plastic lid off. Wads of crumpled $1, $5, and $10 bills spilled onto the linoleum. I shoved them frantically into the deep pockets of my heavy canvas jacket. I grabbed my keys, a flashlight, and the steak knife. I didn't look at the cardboard box again. It sat in the middle of the floor like a radioactive core. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the landing. The hallway was empty. I didn't go toward the interior stairs. I went to the back window at the end of the hall, unlatched the rusty lock, and shoved the heavy pane upward. The metal groaned in protest. I climbed out onto the iron fire escape. The cold rain hit me instantly, soaking through my jacket, pasting my hair to my skull. The metal grates were dangerously slick. I gripped the freezing handrail and began to descend the 3 flights to the alleyway behind the laundromat. My boots slipped on the second landing. I went down hard, my shin cracking against the iron edge of the step. Pain exploded up my leg, hot and blinding. I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming, tasting blood. "Get up," I ordered myself. Tears of pain mixing with the rain on my face. "Get up." I dragged myself down the last flight, limping heavily. The alley was pitch black, smelling of rotting garbage and wet asphalt. I hit the ground and started limping toward the street, my hand shoved deep in my pocket, gripping the plastic handle of the steak knife. I was going to catch a freight train. There was a rail yard 2 miles east. I didn't care where it went. I rounded the corner of the brick building, the wind howling off the coast, stinging my eyes. A shadow detached itself from the wall. "You're limping," a voice noted over the sound of the rain. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs with such violent force I thought my chest would crack open. He stood under the broken street lamp at the mouth of the alley. Harrison Cole. He was holding a large, black umbrella, shielding himself from the downpour. He wore a heavy wool overcoat, perfectly tailored, absorbing the dim light. He looked entirely out of place in this rotting coastal slum. Yet he dominated the space effortlessly. I took a step back, my wet boot scraping against the concrete. I pulled the steak knife from my pocket, holding it out in front of me. My hand shook so badly the blade vibrated. Harrison looked at the knife. He didn't laugh. He didn't mock me. He merely tilted his head, his pale eyes catching the yellow light. "A serrated edge," he observed, his voice a low, smooth hum that carried perfectly through the rain. "Messy. It catches on the bone." "Get away from me," I choked out. My voice sounded pathetic, small and brittle. He took a slow step forward. The tip of his leather shoe splashed into a puddle. "I asked Madison a very simple question, Harper." I backed up again. My injured leg throbbed fiercely, barely supporting my weight. "I don't care." I asked her what she smelled when she pulled me from the car, he continued, taking another slow, measured step. He was walking me back into the dead end of the alley. "Do you know what she said?" I didn't answer. I just kept the knife raised. "She said smoke," Harrison murmured. "She said she smelled smoke and gasoline. A perfectly logical answer. The answer a liar would give. He took another step. We were 10 feet apart now. I could smell the sandalwood cutting through the stench of the garbage bins. The engine block had cracked, yes, but the radiator burst first, Harrison said, his tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather in a parlor. It sprayed a mixture of boiling antifreeze and transmission fluid all over the cabin. It has a very distinct, sickly, sweet smell. Like burnt sugar and metal. If someone had leaned into that car to drag me out, that smell would have coated the back of their throat. They would never forget it. My stomach plummeted. I remembered that smell. It had haunted my dreams for years in my first life. I had thrown up in the mud after pulling him out because the sweetness was so nauseating. But you didn't need to answer the question, Harper, Harrison said, softly. He stopped walking. The umbrella shadowed the top half of his face, leaving only his mouth visible. It was curved into a slight, terrifying frown. You answered it the night I met you. I didn't say anything, I whispered, pressing my back against the wet brick wall. There was nowhere left to go. You didn't have to, he replied. When I reached for you, your pupils dilated, your breathing hitched. You braced your left shoulder, dropping it down to protect your neck. That is not the flinch of a shy girl. That is muscle memory. You expected me to strike you. He slowly lowered the umbrella, letting the rain hit his face. The pale, cracked ice of his eyes pinned me to the brick. How could a girl I have never met, Harrison asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate whisper, know exactly how I hit? The absolute truth of his deduction crashed over me. He didn't know about the rebirth. He thought I was a spy. He thought I was someone who had been planted, someone who knew his violent tendencies beforehand. But most importantly, he knew Madison was a fraud, and he knew I was the real girl from the crash. You're a monster, I said, the words scraping out of my raw throat. Harrison didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me with a profound, terrifying hunger. Perhaps, he agreed softly, but I am the monster you belong to. He closed the distance between us in 2 rapid strides. I lunged with the knife, a desperate, wild swing aimed at his chest. He didn't even block it. He simply stepped inside my guard, his large hand snapping out to wrap around my wrist. The grip was like an iron vise. He squeezed, his thumb pressing directly into the nerve cluster on the inside of my arm. A sharp, electric shock of agony shot up to my shoulder. My fingers went numb instantly. The knife clattered to the wet concrete. Before I could pull away, his other hand shot out, grabbing a fistful of my heavy, wet canvas jacket. He slammed me back against the brick wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me in a loud huff. He leaned in close, pinning me there with his body weight. The wet wool of his coat pressed against my chest. His face was inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. Madison was boring, he whispered, his pale eyes dropping to my mouth before locking onto my terrified gaze. She was a cheap imitation. You look at me like you know every sin I've ever committed. I do, I breathed, tears spilling over my eyelashes, mixing with the rain. I stopped fighting. The physical fight drained out of me, replaced by the suffocating, heavy resignation of the slaughterhouse. I had run as far as I could, and he had simply waited at the finish line. Harrison smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made my blood run freezing cold. Good, he said. Then we don't have to pretend. He released my wrist and reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the silver locket, The heavy chain dangled from his long fingers. With agonizing slowness, he reached around my neck, the cold metal brushing against my wet skin, and clasped it shut. The locket settled heavily between my collarbones. It felt exactly like a padlock. "Let's go home, Harper," he whispered against my ear. The transition from the freezing mud of the alley to the leather seats of his private jet felt like a hallucination. My wet clothes were stripped from me in a small, windowless bathroom at the back of the cabin by a silent flight attendant with dead eyes. She handed me a set of heavy silk loungewear. It was navy blue. It felt like cool water sliding over my skin. I hated it. I missed the rough, heavy canvas of my jacket. I missed the smell of Brenda's fryer grease. I sat across from Harrison for 3 hours. He didn't speak. He just drank a glass of amber liquid, reading a thick, leather-bound dossier, occasionally looking up to study me, not like a man looking at a woman, like a vivisectionist looking at a frog pinned to a wax board. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, pressurized quiet, right before a window blows out at 30,000 feet. When the car finally pulled through the wrought iron gates of the coal estate, the sky was bleeding a pale, sickly, gray dawn. The gravel crunched. The sound no longer reminded me of breaking bones. It just sounded like a lock clicking shut. James, the butler with the missing half finger, opened the front doors. He didn't blink when he saw me, instead of Madison walking beside Harrison. "Put her in the east wing," Harrison ordered, handing his coat to James. "The corner suite." "Sir," James murmured. "Miss Madison is currently residing in the east wing." Harrison stopped. He rubbed his jaw, a slow, scraping sound of stubble against skin. "Move her. Put her in a guest room on the first floor, and freeze her credit cards." "Yes, sir." I stood in the marble foyer, the cold seeping through the thin soles of the silk slippers they had given me. I touched my neck. The locket was a heavy block of ice against my collarbone. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice raspy. Harrison paused at the base of the grand staircase. He looked back over his shoulder. The exhaustion of the flight hadn't touched him. He looked sharp, immaculate, and infinitely dangerous. "I have a business meeting, Harper," he said mildly. "I suggest you sleep. You look terrible." He walked up the stairs. I watched him go, the phantom memory of my own blood pooling on this exact spot, making my stomach churn. The corner suite was the size of my entire apartment complex in Oregon. It smelled of ozone and expensive linen. I didn't get into the massive, 4-poster bed. I locked the heavy mahogany door, dragged a velvet armchair to the corner of the room, and sat facing the entrance. I stayed awake for 36 hours. I listened to the house. It had a rhythm. The muffled vacuuming at noon, the clinking of silverware from the kitchens at 6, and at 2 a.m., the unmistakable sound of Madison screaming. It was muffled by the thick walls, but I knew the pitch of her voice. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of furious, desperate entitlement. I crept to the door and pressed my ear against the cool wood. "You can't do this to me," Madison shrieked from somewhere downstairs. "I'm your fiancé. We're in the papers. You gave me a ring. The ring is a prop." Harrison's voice drifted up, distorted by the echo of the grand hall. It was low, bored. "You played a part, Madison. The curtain has fallen. Pack your bags. It's her, isn't it?" Madison's voice cracked into a hysterical sob. "That little rat, Harper. She lied to you. She set me up." I heard the sharp, unmistakable sound of glass shattering, a heavy vase hitting the marble floor. Do not test my patience, Madison." Harrison's voice dropped an octave, losing the bored drawl. It became the low, vibrating growl of an idling chainsaw. "The car is waiting. If you are not in it by the time I finish this drink, I will have my security drag you out by your hair. And then I will call my lawyers and have your mother's house seized for the debts she owes my holding company." Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. 10 minutes later, the front doors thudded shut. An engine started. Tires spun on the gravel. She was gone. I slid down the mahogany door, sitting on the plush carpet. I brought my knees to my chest. I had won. The parasite that had stolen my life was cast out into the cold, completely broken. But as I sat there, in the gilded cage, listening to the heavy, measured footsteps of Harrison Cole climbing the stairs toward my room, I realized something horrifying. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt like the next pig on the hook. The handle turned. The door was locked, but I heard the scrape of a master key sliding into the tumbler. I didn't move. I stayed on the floor, watching the heavy wood swing inward. Harrison stood in the doorway. He had taken his jacket off. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. The sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand. He looked down at me. "Get up." I didn't move. I rested my chin on my knees. "No." His eyes narrowed. A flicker of genuine surprise broke through the icy facade. People didn't tell Harrison Cole, no. In my past life, I certainly never did. I used to scramble to my feet the second he entered a room, terrified of being perceived as lazy or disrespectful. He stepped into the room and shut the door behind him with a soft click. He walked over to me, his heavy shoes sinking into the carpet. He towered over me, a physical mountain of threat. "Are you testing me, Harper?" he asked softly. "I'm tired," I said. My voice was flat, empty. "If you want to hit me, just do it. I don't have the energy to run around the room for you." The silence stretched. The smell of sandalwood and expensive alcohol washed over me. I kept my eyes fixed on the cuffs of his trousers. I waited for the blow. I braced my jaw, mentally preparing for the white flash of pain, the taste of copper. It didn't come. Instead, I heard the rustle of fabric. Harrison sank down, crouching so his face was level with mine. I flinched, snapping my head back, my spine hitting the door. He didn't reach for me. He just took a sip of his scotch. The ice clinked against the glass. "You fascinate me," he murmured, his pale eyes searching my face, digging into the dark circles under my eyes, the tense line of my mouth. Madison was a grasping, predictable little creature. She wanted the money. She wanted the cameras. I bought her for the price of a diamond, and I threw her away for free. He tilted his head. "But you ran away from $3 billion. You lived in a slum, smelling of fish and cheap bleach, to hide from me. And yet, you know me." "I don't know you," I lied, my voice shaking slightly. "You do." He leaned in closer. "You know exactly what I am capable of. You look at me, and you see the basement, don't you? You see the violence, my breath caught in my throat." He didn't know about the past life, but his intuition was monstrously sharp. He was reading the scars on my soul. "How?" he whispered. "How do you know?" I looked into his eyes. They were completely devoid of empathy. They were the eyes of an apex predator, trying to figure out how a mouse had mapped out its hunting grounds. Suddenly, a strange, dark calm washed over me. It started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. I was going to die anyway. If not today, then eventually. I knew the timeline. In 3 years, his offshore accounts would be frozen by the feds. In 3.5 years, the men he owed money to in Macau would send the assassins to this house. I had died terrified in my last life. I refused to do it again. I know about the shell companies, I said quietly. Harrison froze. The tumbler in his hand stopped midair. I know about the accounts in Cyprus, I continued, my voice steadying. I know about the $400 million you siphoned from the pension funds to cover your losses in Macau last year. The air in the room plummeted to absolute zero. Harrison didn't blink. The lazy, amused predator vanished. In its place was a machine, calculating threat levels. Who sent you? He asked. The baritone hum of his voice was gone. It was a flat, metallic rasp. No one sent me, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was angry, a deep tectonic anger that had been simmering for a lifetime. I know you kept the ledger on a physical hard drive. I know it's in the safe, behind the portrait in your study. The combination is your mother's birth date. Backward. His free hand shot out, grabbing my throat. He didn't squeeze. He just held me there, pinning my head to the door. His fingers were cold, calloused, pressing against my pulse point. His thumb brushed against the silver locket. If you are federal, he hissed, his face inches from mine, you will not leave this room alive. If I were federal, I choked out, a bitter, cynical smile twisting my lips. I wouldn't be sitting on the floor in silk pajamas. I'd be kicking your door down with a warrant. He stared at me, his eyes searching frantically for a lie. He found nothing but exhausted truth. Then how? He demanded, his grip tightening just a fraction. It doesn't matter, I whispered. What matters is that you're going to keep me here. You're going to give me my own wing of this house. You're never going to touch me again. And in return, I won't tell the SEC where the bodies are buried. We stayed like that for a long time. The only sound was the jagged rasp of my breathing and the ticking of a grandfather clock down the hall. I was playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded chamber. If he snapped my neck now, it was over. But I knew Harrison Cole. He didn't destroy assets he could use, and he didn't kill people who held a gun to his head until he had disarmed them first. Slowly, agonizingly, his fingers loosened. He pulled his hand back. He stood up, towering over me once again. He smoothed the front of his shirt. The mask of aristocratic indifference slammed back into place, but I could see the tiny pulse beating erratically in his jaw. You are a very dangerous little rat, Harper, he said softly. I had a good teacher, I replied, looking up at him. He drained the rest of his scotch. The West Wing is yours. Do not come into my study. Do not speak to my staff, less necessary. He turned and walked to the door. And Harper? I didn't answer. He looked over his shoulder. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was terrifying and beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth. Welcome home. 2 years passed. The public narrative was seamless. Billionaire Harrison Cole quietly married the woman who saved his life in a private, untelevised ceremony. Madison, the crazed stalker who had briefly impersonated me, was quietly institutionalized after a highly publicized breakdown in a hotel lobby, funded entirely by Harrison's discreet donations to the facility. Diane lost the house. I didn't ask where she went. I didn't care. I lived in the West Wing. It was beautiful. Vaulted ceilings, massive arched windows overlooking the cliffs, a library that smelled of old paper and dust motes. We lived a bizarre, parasitic existence. We ate dinner together every night at opposite ends of the long mahogany table. We didn't speak of the ledger. We didn't speak of the past. We spoke of art, of the stock market, of the weather. He never laid a hand on me, not once. It wasn't out of respect, and it certainly wasn't out of love. It was a cold war. He knew I held the trigger to his empire, and I knew he possessed the physical capacity to snap my spine. We orbited each other like two venomous snakes, locked in a glass box, fascinated and repulsed by the other's lethality. I watched him. I studied the way his jaw tightened when a business deal went south, the way he drank his scotch when the stress of his illegal debts gnawed at the edges of his sanity. In my past life, these signs meant I needed to hide. Now, they were just data points. I realized slowly that he was utterly alone. He was a monster, yes, but he was a monster trapped in a cage of his own making, paranoid, isolated, constantly waiting for the knife in his back. And I was the only person in the world who wasn't trying to stab him in the back, solely because I had already slit his throat in my mind. On a rainy Tuesday, in the 3rd year of our arrangement, the timeline caught up with us. I was sitting in my library, reading a book on soil chemistry. The rain was lashing against the glass, blurring the world outside into a smear of gray and green. The heavy oak doors opened. Harrison walked in. He looked terrible. His tie was loose. His pale eyes were bloodshot, the skin beneath them bruised with exhaustion. He smelled heavily of metallic sweat and stale alcohol. He walked over to my leather armchair and dropped a thick manila envelope onto the small table beside me. It landed with a heavy thwack. I looked at the envelope, then up at him. "What is this?" "Passports, bearer bonds, a deed to a property in Switzerland under an alias," he said. His voice was completely hollowed out. My heart skipped a beat. The assassins from Macau. They were coming. They froze the accounts this morning, he said, staring blankly at the rain hitting the window. The men I owe money to. They breached the perimeter of the estate 10 minutes ago. James is dead. The air in the room vanished. I gripped the armrests of my chair, my knuckles turning white. The memory of the marble floor, the copper taste of my own blood, rushed back with sickening clarity. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He finally looked at me. The monster was gone. Underneath it was just a tired, broken man, staring at the only thing he hadn't managed to completely destroy. "Because," Harrison said slowly, "for the last 3 years, you are the only person who hasn't lied to me." He reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy black handgun. He checked the magazine, the metal sliding with a sharp, lethal clack. "There's a service tunnel beneath the wine cellar," he said, turning toward the door. "It lets out a mile past the highway. Take the envelope. Run, Harper." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked out, shutting the heavy oak doors behind him. I sat there for a long time. The house was silent, too silent. I looked at the thick envelope. A new life, a clean break, Switzerland, mountains, cold air, safety. It was everything I had wanted when I boarded that Greyhound bus in the pouring rain. I reached up and touched the heavy silver locket resting against my collarbone. I ran my thumb over the engraved HC. My first life, I died begging him to help me. He had used me as a human shield, throwing me into the line of fire so he could escape through the back door. In this life, he was walking into the fire to give me a head start. I stood up. I didn't touch the envelope. I walked over to the heavy fireplace at the end of the library. I reached behind the loose brick on the mantelpiece, my fingers scraping against the rough soot, and pulled out the small, loaded revolver I had stolen from his study 2 years ago. The metal was cold, heavy, real. I didn't owe him anything. He was a monster. He had killed me once. But as I heard the faint, muffled sound of glass shattering downstairs, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire, a twisted, cynical smile stretched across my face. He was a monster, but he was my monster. I clicked the safety off the revolver. I pushed the library doors open and walked out into the dimly lit hallway, heading toward the sound of the gunfire. Let the ghost try and kill me this time. I was done running. Wow, Harper didn't just survive the cage. She became the warden. That twist ending proves that sometimes the line between the victim and the villain is written in shades of gray. Did you expect Harrison to sacrifice himself? Or did Harper make the ultimate mistake by staying to fight? Let me know your theories in the comments down below. If you love this dark, psychological Reborn drama, make sure to hit that like button, share it with your fellow story junkies, and subscribe to the channel for more raw, twisted tales. Until next time, stay sharp.